Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Canada. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I'd like to start by saying I get really weirded out by these video introductions, but inshallah I'll try to orient myself. I was actually asked what topic I'd like to speak on, and I gave it some thought, and I actually picked this passage myself. One of the most difficult and most profound and beautiful passages of the entire Quran, the parable of light, that begins with the remarkable ayah, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Many of you are familiar with the ayat. Allah is the light of the skies and the earth, how it's roughly translated. And I do want to talk about these ayat with you in the next few minutes that I have with you, but before I do, I want to share something about my approach. And just the recognition that I have of the time and place and the audience that I'm speaking to. In my experience, the Book of Allah can be studied at many different depths. And there is no end to the depth of the Book of Allah. After trying to understand this book for more than the last decade, I've come to the conclusion that even one ayah, you can only understand some things about it. And even then, you will come across those who have reflected on it and thought about it deeply, and have had to say things, and you look at the same ayah and you realize you never actually knew this ayah like they did, and so there's no end to the depth, and there's no end really to the wisdom that is captured inside every single ayah of Allah Azza wa Jal's beautiful and perfect book. But at the same time, there's the other end of the spectrum. The Muslims, I feel, for the most part, are suffering from many tragedies, and one of them is a distance from Allah's book. On the one hand, you have this approach to the Quran where you just read a translation and you assume that that is all it has to offer, which is a tragedy. I don't think it's fair for us to think that we've read a translation of the Quran and assume that we actually understand what Allah Azza wa Jal has to tell us. What Allah has to tell us is far more profound, far deeper, and far more beautiful than any human attempt at trying to even explain it, much less translate it. That's not even possible. So on the one hand, you have this tragedy of so many Muslims underestimating the value and the power and the beauty of the Quran. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you have people that are trying to understand the Book of Allah and trying to study it in more depth. But when they present it to people, when they teach it to people, or at least try, they teach it in such a difficult way, in such a technical way that people just, nothing, what is he talking about? He just quoted like 80 different scholars and talked about some grammatical stuff and some roots of this or that or the other, but I don't get it. I don't know what he's talking about. And then people come out of that kind of a lecture saying, man, that was deep. And then you say, what did he talk about? I don't know, but it was deep, man. That was deep, So I find myself in a very perplexed situation. On the one hand, these are profoundly beautiful, deep ayat. And even whatever little I've been able to study is really, for me, sometimes too deep. I have to sit back, take a break. Wallahi, sometimes I decide to study a passage of the Quran seriously, and I'll spend a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months on a few set of ayat. I'm reading a tafsir or taking some notes or listening to a scholar or just writing some things down. I get to a point where it gets so overwhelming for me that I just have to stop and go and play with my kids and play a video game or something to get it out of my head, because it's overwhelming. It really is overwhelming. And so this is one of those lectures where I'm overwhelmed about what to share with you and what to hold back. Obviously cognizant of the fact that there are children in our audience. There are young people in our audience. There are people in our audience that have no background in the Arabic language, or they don't even know what the word tafsir means, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. But even they deserve to hear something about the Quran. They deserve to hear something about what makes it so beautiful. So I'm going to try. I don't promise you anything. I do not give you any guarantees at all. I mean, I am expecting a colossal disappointment here. But still, people say, I'm looking forward to your speech. I was like, you're looking forward to the wrong thing. But let's try to get at least some things that I've been able to grasp, and some lessons that I think you'll find very beautiful too, in this one of the most beautiful passages in the Quran. And at first, why did I choose this passage? I chose this passage inspired by many conversations with young Muslims from all over the world that are having a crisis of faith. They're just suffering a crisis of faith. Ustad Norman, I'm having some doubts. Ustad Norman, I'm not so sure. Ustad Norman, why does Allah talk about hellfire so much in the Quran? Ustad Norman, how come He says this in the Quran? I'm disturbed by that. Yeah, why is Allah going to do this or that or the other? Why is this happening to me? And people they have these questions, these really deep questions. And these are questions being asked by 14-year-olds. And it's shocking sometimes, like, dude, you haven't even taken a philosophy class yet. Thank you, YouTube. Right? So young kids are exposed to these philosophical crises on top of all the other chaos in their lives, not to mention the disintegration of the basic family unit where parents don't know what it means to be parents anymore. We don't know what it means to have a regular conversation with our children anymore. We don't do this stuff. We don't actually assume that our children are going to have major crises of faith in their young years. We assume their Islam is going to be on autopilot. But when they get to that point and they start asking their parents some tough questions, a lot of us parents, we just kind of panic. We're like, oh, there's some kind of shaitan possessing this child. Go take him to the imam, and the imam's going to be like, and then it's going to be gone. But this kid's problems have not gone away. He's got more questions and more questions and more questions. And yes, it is a fact that almost all of the conversations I've had with young people about their crisis of faith, it has boiled down to a combination of two things. On the one hand, at the core of it, there is a spiritual problem. At the heart of it, there is a spiritual disease, which is then wrapped with an intellectual confusion. But at the heart of it, there is still that spiritual problem. And I don't diminish or ridicule the intellectual problem. I don't. I think they both need to be addressed. But we need to understand and diagnose the problem first before we offer medication. So when our kids start having these kinds of crises and we take them to do some ruqyah on them or something, we're attempting to solve possibly a spiritual problem, but have given no respect or no credence to the fact that there may be an intellectual problem as well. There may be a psychological problem as well. And so I think this is one of those places in the Quran that is so important, that everybody should understand so well. This passage to me, you know what it did for me when I was a student in college? This was the passage that told me who I was. I was a student of psychology. And when I was studying psychology, there's one thing in psychology studies that there's no agreement on. You know what it is? Personality. The definition of personality. What is it? Oh my God, you've done a PhD in psychology, which is all of it is the study of the human personality. And the one thing we haven't figured out yet is what? What is personality? Subhanallah. Allah says this so articulately in the Quran. He says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. They ask you about the ruh. They tell them the ruh is from the commandment of my master. You haven't been given except very little. Whatever we can figure out even about ourselves is just the tip of the iceberg. Well, you know what? Allah revealed to us something about ourselves that you could not have found in philosophy and you could not have found in psychology. This can only have come from Allah. And when I started seeing myself, pun intended, in light of these ayat, when I started seeing myself in light of these ayat, I figured stuff out about myself that I couldn't have figured out on my own. Really, I started looking at myself differently, and I hope I can do some of that for you today, even though my time's really short. Let's begin, inshallah ta'ala. Allah begins by calling Himself the light of the skies and the earth. And many ulama have commented on the fact that this is actually a parable, meaning you can think of Allah like you think of light for the skies and the earth. Now, what does that parable mean? First of all, the parable is so strong that there is no adatut tashbih. There's no device used to call it a parable. This is done in the Arabic language when two things are very comparable, when there's a very close association. So Allah wants us to deeply reflect and think about the concept of light, to think about light. So I'll say a few things about light. If there is no light, then doesn't matter how beautiful the universe is, we see nothing. Doesn't matter if you and I have both eyes. Our eyes are useless without the presence of what? Light. Reality as we know it around us is actually irrelevant entirely. All we have around us then is darkness and nothing. And incidentally, we know now that light isn't just a means by which we can see. Light is a fundamental to life on this earth. Without light, you don't get plants. And without plants, you don't have life. Light is essential to life. And it's interesting that in the world, the places in the world, geographically speaking, that have the least amount of sunlight, the places in the world that are really gloomy and dark and cloudy, Europe, have the highest levels of depression in the world. People don't enjoy their life. They're miserable and cynical and dark. It's weird that in a city that is as well off as Seattle, Washington, a beautiful city covered in mountains, it's gorgeous, has one of the highest suicide rates in America. And many psychologists are trying to attribute it to the rains all the time, and it's always dark and there's not enough sun. They get sunlight maybe a couple of weeks in the year. So, subhanallah, what a powerful parable. So now let's think about this light. There are two things. In the Arabic language, by the way, one of the words for eyes themselves is nur. Vision itself is also called nur. So in order for us to appreciate vision, to see reality around us, there are two things necessary. This light, the light inside of you, the light of your eyes, nurul ayn, and also you need light outside. A light inside and a light outside. If any one of those is missing, you're as good as blind. Isn't that clear? Is that simple enough for everybody? Okay. Now let's take it a step further. This is physical light. What I just talked about is physical light. But Allah is telling us something about spiritual light by making us think about physical light because they're similar. Now in the spiritual sense, there's a light inside of us. It's not here, it's here. There's a light Allah poured inside of us. When I was inside my mom's belly, then an angel was delivered to put some light inside of her. That would be something I would be pre-programmed with. All of you, the ruh is a form of light that is inside of us. There's a light inside of us. But that light on its own can only see so much until there's what? Light on the outside, right? There has to be light on the outside. So now what is that light on the outside? Allah Azza wa Jal describes His book. He describes His book and He says, فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَالنُّورِ الَّذِي أَنزَلْنَا. Believe in Allah and His Messenger and the light that we've sent down. Just like there are two ingredients to physical light, there are two ingredients to spiritual light. The human being has a yearning inside of him and her. We have this light inside of us that wants something. It's looking for some kind of perfection because it came from a perfect source. So when revelation comes, when the word of Allah comes, when the teachings of His Prophet come, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then they complete that light inside. This is the passage about these two lights meeting each other. So Allah says, and actually before I go further, I need some more things to talk to you about. Oh man, this passage. You know, right now we're inside this indoors hall, and there are these funky artificial lights. They're pretty cool, but we got these lights inside, and we need these lights. If this is not on, then it doesn't matter if it's day outside, we are completely blacked out. At nighttime, imagine what the electricity bill for one city is. Just imagine. Forget one building, an entire city, how much energy is spent to keep the lights on at night. Incredible, isn't it? Just absolutely mind-boggling how much energy is exhausted by human effort to put light when the sun's light goes away. Now Allah has a lamp, the sun. Allah created His light, and then we have our light. When Allah takes His lamp down, when the sun goes down, then you and I have to struggle to turn our lamps on. Back in the day, the lantern. You got to turn the lights on, switch the bulbs, right? We got to do all of that. And as best as we can do, can we simulate His light? Is it as good as the light He gives us in the day? No. Subhanallah. You can try to come up with whatever you can, but as much as you will, your light will be limited, and overwhelmingly the world will be surrounded by darkness. And yet when Allah brings His light, when He brings the sun out, what happens? They say in Arabic, أَغْنَى الصَّبَاحَ عَنِ الْمِصْبَاحِ, that the lamp made the morning made the lamp irrelevant. Your light and my light, keeping the lights on in the morning, especially if you're Desi, you'd never do it actually. You don't even turn them on at nighttime. But anyway, you definitely wouldn't turn them on in the day. Because the sun's enough. Just open the window, move the curtains. The sunlight is enough. It'll light everything else up. In other words, Allah's light is overwhelming and undeniable. There's no escape from it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And so we're beginning with something. I have my concept of light. I have my struggles towards light, my limited light. But Allah's light is just limitless. I can't even compare. And it comes from such a much higher source. It's a much more powerful source. Now he says, let me help you understand this parable a little better. Allah Azza wa Jal takes us deeper and deeper and deeper. He says, مَثَلُ نُورِهِ كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِيهَا مِصْبَاحٍ